Abbiamo messo la più scomoda che avevamo per metterla su Ale. Siamo organizzatissimi qua. Allora, direi che si possa partire e naturalmente dobbiamo switchare all'inglese, essendo questo corso di laurea offerto in lingua inglese. And I have the pleasure to serve as a deputy chair of this jury, and we have these first candidate, Chiara Bonvento, who's presenting dissertation, The Looting of Iraq, Comparative Analysis between the Baghdad and Mosul Museums. The supervisor is my friend and colleague, Professor Stefano Campana, whom I leave immediately the floor.
So thank you very much, President. I would like to point out a few remarks. Let's say first that the candidate, a bit noisy.
Yeah, I think that Jamina, can you mute your microphone?
Everybody?
Oh, okay.
I can do.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
So I was saying that the candidate choose a complex theme to work on. I mean, looting is, it's just a word, but I mean, it's involving a very, a very complex environment, which is moving from, the illegal excavation, but the pipeline is very long, is complicated, is involving, auction houses, illicit transportation and trafficking of antiquities. It's involving museum, private clients, different legislations of different countries. So, first of all, is a very broad theme. And another point that I think is very important, to know is that the candidate, is not an archaeologist. So she got her first degree in economics, and now she decided to focus and to work on this, let's say, on this theme, on this subject. Another point I think is important to point out is what I consider peculiarity of the candidate. She was very independent, and she was very independent in her work, in her dissertation, starting from the choice of the subject. Because when she asked me to do a work, let's say, on cultural diplomacy and archaeology, cultural diplomacy and antiquities, we met to talk about which subject she was going to work on. And when we met, she purposed me what she did at the end. So the confrontation on what happened on the looting of the Museum of Baghdad and what happened in the context of Mosul, which was, very fascinating, very interesting, but also pretty complex, because as she will tell us, the first case study, so the Museum of Baghdad, took place roughly 20 years ago. And, there are some publication explaining, and there is a documentation, that has been produced on what happened there. And of course, we are very pleased today to have with us, and he was also the supervisor of the work of the candidate, Professor Mario Fales, who wrote an amazing book on what happened in Baghdad. But in Mosul is very different, because what happened in Mosul took place just a few years ago, and there are just some studies that started on trying to understand what happened there. So, I mean, it was a tricky and challenging work, which at least, I mean, I would say that she did and she faced in a very brilliant way, being very independent, and I mean, the overall result is, I think, very positive. But I think that now I can, I mean, leave the floor to the candidate, and he will present us
Excuse me.
dissertation.
Excuse me.
Yes, please.
I do not see Ms. Bonvento at all, so it's too bad. Yes, I can see her back. Her hand. Hello. Good morning. Good morning. I cannot see your face, which is a handicap, of course.
Yeah, I think,
What can I do?
no, I think we can do something here. So I will join the,
Oh, yes, of course, of course. You
Yeah.
can, no, I don't think so, because I mean,
we are in a different,
We are on different continents.
Mi passi il link?
no, we're trying to fix this issue, just a while.
By the way, io penso che Cristina debba dire, guarda che succede se faccio.
Maybe if she turns around her chair, like it's a question of Columbus and the egg. Oh.
Ok, allora io entro nel meet di Stefano, ovviamente muto, tanto c'è il microfono. Dov'è il coso? Mi ammetto da solo, Stefano.
Nel caso io provo
Mi metto muto.
Ecco,
Questo
adesso.
sono io.
Bene, buongiorno.
È evidente che non sono Chiara, ma magicamente adesso avremo anche Chiara.
È chiarissimo. Oh, buonasera. Good evening.
We can proceed.
Okay. Thank you.
Non lo so. Dovresti venire qua, forse.
I can
No,
hear you.
Just a while, yeah.
The 2 years of pandemic, we should be able to manage these things, but apparently.
Presentazione?
Sì, presentazione 100%.
All right. Ora puoi allargare.
Sì, però prima devo condividere. Vedo lo stesso.
Ok.
E ora penso che
Sì.
o così
Perfetto.
con la tastiera.
Thank you very much.
We do that.
Okay, so this is just a way of learning about
Louder, louder,
Yeah. You need the mic.
louder.
Here I am. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. Perfect.
So my thesis is mainly about the concept of looting. Looting can be described as the illicit removal of archaeological material from the ground to be exploited in order to be sold onto the international black market for a commercial gain. What there is to take into consideration is the fact that this mechanism undermines the integrity of cultural heritage, threatening both the sites that archaeologists are already aware about and the ones that have not been discovered yet. In this regard, the concept of context is of paramount importance. Once artifacts are stripped from the ground, they lose their contextual evidence and cultural meanings, and their function as historical documents is deeply compromised. The context of an artifact can be described as composed by different elements, such as the matrix, which is the material that surrounds an artifact. This could be clay or sand. Then there is the provenience, which is the arrangement of the artifact within the matrix, and then its juxtaposition with the elements adjacent to it. Archaeological remains are finite in their existence, and so is the information that they may yield. What there is to take into consideration is the fact that looters, there is not a representative category of looters. This could be a government official or a local resident or an entire organization. And looting, this mechanism works through the economic law of supply and demand, which has deeply impacted the heritage of Iraq, especially in the last 2 decades. In the month preceding the Iraq War of 2003, many people from the scientific community especially raised concerns about the safeguard and the safety of not just monuments, but also archaeological sites all around the territory of Iraq, especially after considering the lessons brought forward by the Gulf War in '91. However, they were erupted in March, between the night of March 18th and 19th. And no matter how much the employees at the Iraq Museum tried to do everything they could in order to protect the artifacts, the museum was looted. Especially the bulk of the looting happened between April 8 and 12. And only on April 16, the US troops received the direct order from the government to intervene and to protect personally the museum. Just a few days later, on April 22nd, a New York City prosecutor was assigned the task of investigating on the thousands of artifacts that went missing in those few days. His investigation basically revolved around 4 main strategies. First, to identify all the missing items, then to forward to international agency and art agencies images and a brief description for each artifact, then to locally spread the voice, especially with the community leaders, religious community leaders, about the implementation of an amnesty policy about all the artifacts that were to be returned. And then a few raids were organized with the information that were gathered. The strategy employed by Bogdanos and by his team was to build trust within the community, within the local peoples. And so thousands of artifacts came back. However, 12 years later, history was about to repeat itself. And so in 2015, the Mosul Museum was attacked. ISIS militants took over the city of Mosul on June 10th, 2014. And a few months later, February 26, 2015, a video surfaced online published by ISIS about showcasing the destruction that happened within the complex. Archaeologist Lamia Al-Gailani wrote to the Oriental Institute of Chicago a list, a sort of inventory, very brief, about the number of artifacts that were present in that moment at the museum. However, data were not confirmed about what artifacts were still there at the moment. And however, a preliminary attempt in order to understand each artifact and their collocation within the premises of the museum was possible thanks to especially three main sources that I used. Archaeologist Suzanne Bott was present in Iraq between 2008 and 2010, together with UNESCO. And she took hundreds of photographs and uploaded them on a Dropbox link available for everyone online. Through those pictures, I could understand where each artifact was and their collocation. However, at the same time, I used the Interpol database, which is an app available on your phone, in order to understand what artifacts of those that I found in the pictures were cataloged as missing. And then I used a website called Recre, which was created by a group of students just after the attack to the museum. It is a crowdsourcing website which gathers thousands of pictures in order to represent 3D images of everything that has been destroyed. Although very similar in context, what happened to Baghdad and Mosul had many differences in terms of perpetrators, motives, and modus operandi. In Baghdad, there were 3 individuals and separated thefts, and the time at the disposal of these people were ranging just a few days. And their main motive was having money, smuggle those artifacts in exchange for a return. However, what happened in Mosul involved just one terrorist organization, even though composed by many people. And their motive wasn't just money, it was about having power and control. And at their disposal, they had 2.5 years to do anything they wanted with the land. Although these events may seem separate and detached, there could actually, under one perspective, they could actually be seen as connected to one another, in the sense that in order to understand ISIS evolution, one has to take into account the years of mistreatment and harm that was caused to the Iraqis during the Saddam Hussein regime. In the 90s, the situation of the country and its people changed drastically because of the invasion of Kuwait, followed by the Gulf War, and the economic embargo that was imposed on the country drastically reduced the economic situation of the inhabitants, as well as the economic conditions of museums and institutions that had in charge taking care of heritage. At the same time, another problem resulted from a completely separate and detached decision made by Turkey of constructing a series of 22 dams on the Tigris and Euphrates river system. The dams basically reduced drastically the water supply going to Iraq, especially in the southern region of Iraq. This limited the agricultural production of the people. And the combination of local distress paired with an increasing demand coming from the Western societies or the rich countries for antiquities was a deadly combination for looting. Then the situation worsened in 2003, because once the American government took control of the Iraqi lands, they adopted a de-Baathification campaign, which basically meant for all institutions that were affiliated to the Hussein regime to be dismantled, taken down. And so the workforce was sent home. And the same happened to the Iraqi military and to the thousands and thousands of people that were left home with no salaries nor pensions. And at the same time, the situation worsened after the safety conditions of the Iraqi worsened, receiving a humiliating treatment in the American-led facilities, prisons. And 2/3 of the people that were detained in there were actually part of ISIS. As it regards the motives of this organization, there is little agreement in the sense that some blame iconoclastic motives, others blame political decisions or strategic motives. What there is to take into consideration is the fact that these people want to annihilate the local sense of belonging of the communities. They want to annihilate their memories, the collective memories that is built within their monuments. Bevan said that a society is as fragile as its architecture. However, by considering religion as the only motive, one fails to see the bigger picture. This is just an extract of what happened in Mosul. And yeah, let's let's lower the volume. Maybe here, okay. And basically, okay.
What's starting?
And then, all right. And basically, another author took into consideration the fact that the production of images and videos that are used as a propagandistic method by ISIS, that is the real purpose of the organization. According to this theory, basically what happens is that these artifacts were chosen to be destroyed specifically, not for any motive in particular, but specifically to be filmed. However, the motives behind ISIS are also monetary, in the sense that why was Mosul chosen? Mosul was home to 4,500 archaeological sites. And that is why they went there for such a long period of time, to loot their lands. And one primary step in order to slow down the smuggling of artifacts is to raise awareness about the problem, because the first way to slow down a process is to first be aware of it. And not just education should not be just about why cultural heritage is so important, but also people should know the mechanisms that endanger it. Not just at the supply side of the mechanism, but also at the demand side. And one has to take into consideration that the bulk of the problem, all this destruction, has fallen onto the shoulders of the Iraqi themselves and onto their right to own their history and their heritage. And what they have shown is resilience in the face of destruction, which will continue until people will learn to have acceptance, until people will learn to have curiosity for the unknown instead of fearing it, and until they will learn the lessons coming from the past. Thank you.
Supervisor and the co-supervisor would want to.
Forse non bisogna.
Mi passi la tastiera.
Thank you. Put it again. Okay. Okay, so that was,
It's my turn.
let me raise volume again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, hello everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm very glad to be part of this committee, and I would love to be there with you. Unfortunately, some health reasons keep me blocked in Rome, but I'd love to be there in Tuscany. where I have a country home. So I'd love to be in my country home in Tuscany, and which is close to Siena. But anyway, this is the way it is. We do what we can, and I'm very glad to be with you and to judge Ms. Bonvento's thesis even by remote. Now, yes, agreeing with Professor Campana, the fact that Ms. Bonvento is not an archaeologist is absolutely a plus. It means that if non-archaeologists start thinking, they might even understand what archaeology is all about. Although they pretend most of the time not to be able to understand it. It is also true, on the other hand, that archaeologists do their best to make themselves not understood to the general public. And this has resulted in a series of crossfires and of cross purposes that are still beleaguering our respective communities. On the other hand, people are ready to use this is just a preliminary for our committee who does not know me. Archaeology is one of the most interesting parlor games played by politicians in the last 50 years. You can use Bosnian antiquities to claim that this was Bosnia. You can reclaim a past to legitimize your political claims on the land. You can invent a silk road so as to call to prepare a program for worldwide commerce. You can do a lot of things with archaeology. Archaeology is one of the things which is less known, but is most played around with for purposes of legitimization and empowerment on the verbal and ideological side of things. So this brings us to the theme, of course. The theme is a very interesting comparison by Ms. Bonvento of the two lootings, major lootings that took place in major museums in Iraq in the last 20 years. The first one, yes, I enjoyed, I suffered, and fought through a 500-page volume, which did not win the Premio Viareggio because Eugenio Scalfari decided that it was not going to win the Premio Viareggio, but it doesn't matter. It ended second. I'm happy anyway. Everybody congratulated me, but it was not my year. Anyway, what it did do is that it brought attention to this fact of the looting. Also, the Americans, incredibly enough, read the book, not in English. Fantastic. A record, a major record. Reading literature not in English. Wow. Even in French, in German. Americans don't do this thing. It's bad. It's bad for you. It's bad for your mind. And so even Americans read the book on the looting of the Museum of Baghdad, and they enjoyed it. I think it is relatively quoted, and I tried to do my best to show that a multifactorial engagement is at work here. In this sense, if I may, I must contradict the nice presentation by Ms. Bonvento, Saddam was not only a cutthroat and a terrible person. He was also a great benefactor of Iraqi culture. These things happen. These things happen to dictators. They find themselves in the wrong place in the right moment. And Saddam had remade the Iraq Museum in Baghdad and had modernized it and had made it the world standard and led the school boys of Iraq all through with their teachers all through the Iraq museums for years. And he was the first one to say that there was no antecedents of Islam in Iraq. So history did not begin with Islam in Iraq. This is what he said for the first 20 years. Then the last 20 years, he started going toward Islam himself because he noticed that the public of Iraq was becoming increasingly Shiite. Well, the Shiites of Iran were very powerful, and so he had to fight them with their own weapons. But in any case, the refurbishing, the restructuring, the rebuilding of the Iraq Museum was made in a totally lay, absolutely non-parochial vein, and was carried out in a modern light. Not so much the rebuilding of Babylon, which was done in a Disneylandish, totally Disneylandish and propaganda-fed reconstruction. But the Iraq Museum was well done, was a well-done job. It was a nice museum. And as museums go, of course, museums have all their disadvantages. In all museums, the artifacts are isolated from their context. Many people feel that, yes, Ms. Bonvento, you're right. Many people feel that archaeology should belong into the ground because it is a non-replicable science. If you take the stuff out from the ground, you cannot put it back again. And so it does not fall into the criteria of science. It cannot be repeated. And unless by very complicated digital reconstructions. So these are some minimalia of the basic problems that beleaguer archaeology today. Misappropriation, people trying to get to the best of a certain part of reality for their own purposes. This is what happened already in Iraq. Are we to judge? How are we to judge in the middle of a war where a country is called fascista, is called fascist, but there are no signs of fascism in the country that is attacked this very moment and day, while there are some slight signs of fascism in the country that is attacking. So you see, we are playing with words all over the place. We have left globalization to play with tags, words, and this is very, it's appropriate that Ms. Bonvento's thesis comes at this time to illuminate us on a very small issue, but it's interesting. Why? I'll be clear now. The two lootings are totally different in character, in time, as she showed in the space and in range, in meaning and in scope. They were meant for different audiences. The first one was not meant for any audience. It was meant for looting. The second one was a fake looting that was meant for an audience. In fact, ISIS did not have a cultural policy at the beginning of its um, attack on Mosul, etc. I was in Iraq the year before. I was in Iraq in 1212, when you could not go to Mosul because they kidnapped you. But so we didn't go to Mosul. but it was not so dangerous. There was not an Islamic State yet in place, and I could go to Khorsabad, over the Iraqi frontier. I crossed the Iraqi frontier a number of times from Kurdistan, and the war. There was no ISIS yet. The next year there was ISIS, and things had changed. And ISIS built its ideology going ahead while it was working. And so cultural ideology, which it did not have, was also constructed in the making. And this is very interesting. The comparison thus of the two lootings is very interesting from this point of view, because they are two completely different actions, and they open, if you don't mind, dear colleagues, they open up the problem of will there be other lootings for still different purposes? Will the purposes change every time? Are we to start thinking of actions that are moved in scope, range, time, place, exactly for specific reasons, predetermined reasons? Will looting become a one of the guidelines for political and for conquest and resilience on the other hand? Yes, and we'll see. This thesis is interesting because it brings to light this problem, which is often overlooked, has been overlooked until now. So I want to stress it with this. I am stressing the originality of this line of thought, which I commend very much, for which I commend very much the candidate, Ms. Bonvento, and of course Professor Campana, who thought the subject out. I am very interested in this, and I believe it should, while being slightly reworked in a number of details, and perhaps deepened in some of its implications. It should be the thesis should be up for publication sooner or later. I hope sooner than later, and we are willing, of course, with our means and the things we keep in touch with and control. We're willing to help out for this purpose to be realized, for a book on this specific comparison, made this way by a non-archaeologist, by mainly non-archaeological criteria, but by the criteria of functionality of and all the implications should be published. So what can I say? I can only praise the candidate for her good work, and I understand this is just a stepping stone for further fame in different fields and in other walks of life. But I hope she will follow through on this thesis and bring it to completion as a publication. I don't have a specific question to tell you, except that at a certain point on page 16, I don't remember, 41, you talk about Danny George. Danny George was a wonderful man, and he saved the Baghdad Museum because maybe the colleagues don't know this, but this is interesting. Nobody saved the Baghdad Museum except for Donny George Yohanna, a Christian who worked in the museum, because he found a satellite phone, and he called John Curtis in London, and who is a very good friend and a wonderful Iraqi archaeologist, and he said, "Hey, they are looting us. They've been looting us for 3 days, and you said that you and Blair said that you would do nothing. You said Blair said nothing was going to be hurt, and so John Curtis called the Blair people, the Blairites, and finally, 6 hours later, the looting stopped. Just a satellite phone call from Donny George was enough to save. Otherwise, they would have gone looting forever. And Donny George was a wonderful man, and he finally became director. And unfortunately, I was about to meet him at another conference 3 years later, but he died, had a heart attack at an airport arriving. And so he died very young, poor man. Well, not so young, but not so old either. And I'm very sorry about this, because he deserves to be remembered for this action, this heroic and sharp and intelligent action of his, finding a satellite phone and calling England for help. And if you think, if the committee, if the president and the chair people think that I have gone far and wide, I would like you to know that Mr. Blair is about to be indicted. Is about to be indicted at a international court of law for his invasion of Iraq, after having declared that he would not invade Iraq. So, if we are speaking these days of bringing people to the court of law, we still have to bring to the court of law people who had said they would never invade Iraq, and then they did, and they let things go slide down in 2003 in the most terrible way, which has ruined the country, ruined the people, ruined a part of the world, and has led us to where we are now. So history is not over. Is not over this afternoon. It goes on tomorrow morning. Thank you very much for having me on this panel.
Thank you, Professor Faes. Well, I didn't hear questions, as you said, so I think that Stefano, you can close this commentary. I don't know if the candidate wants to add something. I think.
Well, maybe I would just say something about also, I mean, the connection between, I mean, the work that she did and the cultural diplomacy that, in my view, I mean, is at the end, I mean, is the connection between archaeology and cultural diplomacy. And I was, let's say, very happy, I mean, to find as the first sentence of the introduction of the thesis of Chiara, I mean, telling about the concept that at the end, the main value, I would say, from the point of view at least of cultural diplomacy, but also probably from other perspective too, of archaeology, is that archaeology is transcendent. So archaeology will survive us, and is notwithstanding, as Professor Faes said, I mean, archaeologists are not that good, let's say, to explain what we are doing in our work. And telling about our work, I would say that generally speaking, probably, unfortunately, I mean, archaeology is speaking himself. So, I mean, archaeology is will survive us, and is bringing, let's say, our heritage to the next generation. So, and this is probably the main message from the point of view, I would say, of cultural diplomacy. And I mean, she perfectly got this point too. So that's it.
Thank you. You want to add something to close this discussion, which was very why but so generous for your thesis? Because I heard mainly congratulations, basically, among the lines.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to write it, and I would just like to thank Professor Campana, because before entering into his class, I had no idea about what looting was. And as I had no idea, so many other people in the world, in Italy right now, have no idea what it is and the damage that especially has been caused to these countries from the demand coming to other countries. When Christie's or Sotheby's upload online a new piece, you take it for granted that they have been scrupulous in their due diligence, but it's not always the case. And so it is an issue that impacts us every day. And I would just like more people to be aware of it, starting from high school, for instance, introducing it to art class, for instance. It would be so easy just for people to start opening their eyes a bit about the issue.
Yes, thanks. Well, that's something that in this kind of courses we notice, and actually this is a sense of community learning that is not only by your side, because we still have to learn about the meaning of our, let's say, disciplinary work in a changing context, and especially in the context of international relation, international cooperation, and so on. That's why I used to say to my students that I'm not sure about at the beginning of the course what I'm going to teach, but I'm sure that I'm going to learn. And that is a common sense of learning. Now, we thank you, Chiara. We ask you to leave the floor for a few minutes, for a few seconds. I don't think we will have a very long discussion, but I will use my bell to call you, so don't go too far.
Thank you. I'm going to thank Fallis, Professor Fallis.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Fallis, for your presence. Thank you very much, and especially thank you for your book and for everything that you wrote. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much. I must tell you. Thank you very much. Let's hope to work together again with Professor Campana. Okay? Ciao,
Okay.
ciao.
Solo un minuto, vi chiediamo di lasciare l'aula per conferire sulla valutazione della candidata.
Devo uscire anch'io? No.
No, tu sei assolutamente benvenuto.
Bene, lo sapete naturalmente che l'Italia ha il magnifico punto d'onore di essere sede di saccheggio e fautrice di collezionismo selvaggio dovuto ai saccheggi. Cioè stiamo perfetti, siamo proprio Middle East, noi siamo proprio a metà del guado. Collezioniamo.
Per non parlare delle archemafie.
Esatto. Abbiamo fatto con Campana un meeting sulle archeomafie.
Insomma, abbiamo davvero da imparare sulla politica dell'archeologia. Allora, lascio la parola in realtà al mio segretario che ha il comando delle operazioni, ma io vi posso dire che la media è molto elevata, quindi insomma, la parola è ai correlatori, anche al relatore in primis, sapendo che la media è, se non sbaglio, 107 pesati.
Pesate e aritmetica sono pressoché identiche, quindi 108 per arrotondamento.
108 per arrotondamento.
Sentite, io personalmente sono molto soddisfatto, nel senso
direi che 110
la ragazza è molto brava, secondo me è brillante.
Quindi,
come studentessa.
Pensi di poter chiedere la lode?
Io la chiederei alla commissione, poi
il correlatore
è d'accordo.
Cosa ci dice sulla lode?
Allora, il correlatore è uno a cui piace moltissimo mettere la lode quando ci stanno dei bellissimi voti come questi. Quindi io non posso esimermi, vorrei dire, dal proporre la lode per questa cosa.
E allora, come diceva Verdone, come vedi siamo d'accordo. Allora, dunque, io adesso vado su segreteria perché... Ah no, tu mi hai dato anche la cosa. Cioè, non è un segretario, è un autentico badante. Io devo solo trovare...
Comunque sai che a lettere noi non ce l'abbiamo a cantare del giorno.
Sì, questo è il retaggio dei giuristi.
Abbiamo rubato.
I giuristi. Sì, certo.
Sempre così.
Certo, certo. Vediamo.
È già attivo.
Ah.
Basta.
Okay, now I can read the formula here. Miss Chiara Bonvento, given the result of your academic career, this committee has approved your degree examination with a score of 110 out of 110 cum laude. Therefore, by the powers conferred on us by the rector, and in the name of law, of course, we proclaim you Dottore Magistrale in Public and Cultural Diplomacy, classe di laurea LM81.
Brava,
Congratulations.
congratulazioni.
Grazie Chiara
Grazie.
e buon proseguimento. Mi pare che hai avuto qualche buon tip.
Sì, recupero la chiavetta.
Certo, è una facoltà, in genere ce le preghiamo, perché si inizia dalle chiavette e poi si finisce.
Colleghi, io vi lascio, vero?
Certo. Poi ci sentiamo.
Benissimo, grazie di avermi invitato. Buon pomeriggio e arrivederci.
Arrivederci.
Voglio dire una frase polemica. Buon 25 aprile.
Grazie davvero.
Arrivederci.
Allora, possiamo chiamare online su questo stesso canale È già connessa?
Sì.
Ottimo. So we switch again to English. We have a second candidate. Let me just go back to the page here. And the candidate is Danaha Jemina Mandele. Sorry for my pronunciation. Who's presenting a thesis on public diplomacy and international history on diplomacy and development in democracy of Ghana. I leave the floor to my colleague Andrea Francioni, who is the supervisor of this thesis.
Thank you, Chairman. Hi, Jemima. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me too?
Okay, so just a few words to, maybe you have to switch off your microphone while I'm talking because of...
Okay. And do I have to show the camera as well?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
It's on.
Your
It's
camera on and microphone off.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's not anyway. Well, just a few words about Jemima's thesis, which explores the diplomacy-democracy nexus, focusing on Ghana as a case study. And well, why Ghana? Because well, in the first place, and most important, because Ghana is traditionally considered one of the strongest democracies in Africa, and besides, Ghana is the candidate's home country, which is a personal detail, but still a relevant one. And here comes the basic question that Jemima tries to ask, that is, if and how diplomacy has actually contributed to developing a stable democracy in Ghana. The thesis is organized into 4 chapters, 4 main chapters. And apart from the literature review, which provides the theoretical foundations of her study. The most interesting part of the thesis is, I guess, chapter 3, which which is the empirical part, carried out through interviews in order to collect data to be discussed in the fourth chapter. So, Jemima, you have the floor. You can switch on the microphone and present your work to the committee.
All right. Please, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Would I have to share my screen? Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Thank you. As already mentioned by my supervisor, you can hear me clearly. I'm sorry. Am I clear enough?
Yeah.
All right. So as already mentioned by my supervisor, my paper was with the topic Diplomacy and Development of Democracy in Ghana. And with this, I actually sought to know what democracy is. And in the light of this, is actually seen as a form of government which allows the participation of everyone in governance. It actually respects varied views of people and factors them in decision making so that they also feel they are a part of it. And so the most obvious characteristic of democracy, as we all would agree, is free, fair, and transparent elections. Once a state has these, it is usually classified as a democratic state. And for many parts of the world, actually, democracy has replaced other forms of political governance, including Ghana, which is my focus of study. And so the focus of this paper is therefore to understand the democratization of the sub-Saharan African region and how it has fared amid the challenging landscapes of democracy. So with Ghana as focus, I was able to identify that Ghana has gained a reputation as being a beacon of democracy in Africa, but though it's with several struggles. Also, it's seen as one of the nations of the destination of slavery, colonial ships, and also it stands as a point of departure of many slaves in the past when colonization took place. And so during post-colonialism, the nation was ushered into new forms of politics, political parties, and several democratic forms of governance. Ghana, however, with the progress of democracy and its current democratic states, have seen several tests and challenges, and there has also been several failings amidst all the progress. But though the democratization of the sub-Saharan African region is captured in many literature, the role of diplomacy and foreign policy actually it's not too clear. And so this study sees the lack of clarity in literature as a gap worthy of further inquiry in other studies. So the objective of my study was actually to examine the extent to which foreign policy of foreign states has influenced Ghana's democracy, and to identify the ways diplomacy have influenced the development of democracy in Ghana, and also to ascertain the challenges in the development of democracy in Ghana. And so I sought to ask the questions: to what extent has foreign policy of foreign states influenced Ghana's democracy? And also the other question was: to what ways have diplomacy influenced the development of democracy in Ghana? Also, I wanted to know what the challenges are in the development of democracy in Ghana. And so this was the structure of my work, which comprises of chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the conclusions and recommendations in my last chapter. Basically, in the second chapter, which captures the literature review, these are highlights of subheadings I decided to actually refer to, because you cannot talk about democracy and diplomacy without mentioning some of these, actually, especially international relations, the elite theory, the modernization theory. You would have to go into democratization as well, and even the role of the media in communication and information communication and technology. So I highlighted on these as well in my work. And this was the entire conceptual framework, where I started with the system of governance in African nations. I proceeded to diplomacy, and then I ended it with democratization, the influence and the challenges it has, especially on the country of focus, which is Ghana. So I also delved into some works of some scholars, writers, and researchers as well. And the one that caught my attention was actually with that of Sanusi and Jemfi, who are also Ghanaian researchers. They had conducted a research on Ghana's foreign policy, regional and national interests, where the study was actually about Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's non-aligned policy. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah happens to be the first president of Ghana, and his non-aligned policy, it has been very vital variable in Ghana's foreign policy for so many years, and successive regimes, even after Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, have pursued this policy in various ways. Since its 1992 political reforms, Ghana has proven itself to be an anchor in political dispensation on the African continent. And therefore, in the sub-region, which is sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana is seen by other countries as the leader by exhibiting its competencies and maturity in political change and good governance, and also in its peacekeeping involvement. This paper, my study, however, suggested that, together with Sanusi and Jemfi's work, Ghana, for Ghana to play a significant role in ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community for West African States, the government must vigorously involve itself in the move towards an improved policy framework in the sub-Saharan region. They also advised, that is Sanusi and Jemfi in their work, advised that Ghana, as a developing country, should pursue foreign policy that favors all actors of the international community, so that it would avoid friction between member states, especially its immediate neighbors, as well as the entire world at large. So the chapter 3 of my work, which was quite the most interesting part, I sought to see how to go about my methodology, which I chose a design, the sample size, how I went about the data analysis, all seen here on the screen. I actually used a qualitative approach, which is a means for exploring the understanding and meaning of individuals or groups ascribed to social or human problems. My study area was the Center for Democratic Development, which is in Ghana, and also the departmental heads of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I chose my data collection procedure to be a face-to-face interview with these people. And actually, the reason why I went for the departmental heads of Ministry of Foreign Affairs to be included in my study was because their role in diplomacy and foreign policy analysis is quite huge. So that's why I involved them. And I had the opportunity to listen to them attentively as they actually gave responses to my questions, as they recount their roles as well. And so at the end of the day, in my analysis, I employed a thematic approach where I was able to come out with my findings and the discussions of my data collection. I grouped it into 3 themes, which were namely adoption, determinants, and challenges. In the adoptions state, it was concerning the extent to which foreign policy or foreign states has influenced Ghana's democracies. The respondents actually provided lots of insights into this situation, but the one that actually caught my attention had to do with the transition from coup d'etat to elections. Previously, Ghana was with coup d'etat in its democratic state, but then now it has transitioned into elections, which give rooms for different political parties to participate and then feel involved in the uh, development of the state and also in political issues. And so this is evidence that Ghana has been affected by foreign policy in so many other ways. Also in the determinants, there were some issues here. Respondents actually gave their views on why they feel Ghana is not sufficiently managing our affairs as a nation, because there are so many laggards, and so it leaves Ghana as at a place of begging, which usually we depend on others for our survival in terms of finances and even political affairs. We still depend on others, but we hope to get better soon. So also in the challenges, the one that caught my attention with our respondents when I did the interviews regarding the challenges that Ghana has encountered in the quest to develop democracy was bureaucracy. And the respondents actually made it clear that bureaucracy has become something that impedes development, in the sense that during decision making, it takes longer for a conclusion to be arrived at because there are structures in place. Every policy or every decision that comes up has to go through all those structures before it would reach the final decision. And so it actually delays decision making, which also delays development. So after all these, I actually came to the discussion where I grouped them under subheadings, where I actually came up with the idea that the extent to which foreign policy has actually influenced Ghana's democracy cannot be said without mentioning foreign aid. We do seek a lot of foreign aid as a country, and that's why we are actually seen as dependent on others. And because of this, even though the foreign aids are means of interventionist strategies, they are usually attached with conditions in order to influence the system of governance. And one of the major countries seen to have its influence on our system of governance is the Americans, because we do have lots of foreign aids, and because of this, they influence the system of government a lot. So this is how foreign policy has influenced Ghana and its democracy. Also, with diplomacy, it has an influence on Ghana, which currently Ghana sees itself to be independent, but in all honesty, it is not fully independent, because we still rely on others for lots of things which others are able to do for themselves. And that is how an independent state is categorized. And the challenges still stem at bureaucracy, which delays the decision making, and also officials involved in bureaucracy and the rules and policies that has to pass through each of these structures before approval actually delays a lot of time, and it doesn't augur well for development of democracy in the state Ghana. So finally, I came to put everything together, and the study at the end of the day pointed out that diplomacy and democracy usually go hand in hand. You can't talk about diplomacy without talking about democracy. And in Ghana, it has had lots of influences. Also, from the study, it came to fore that some nations have had lots of influence on Ghana, especially the Americans, the United Kingdoms, and even in Europe. There's been lots of influences, and there's been lots of positive impacts on democracy as well as diplomacy states. And responses from our interview also showed that the benefits of democracy have been so helpful and has shaped the nation as a whole. And so, even though we are not at our peak yet as a nation, there's hope to keep going. And as we watch the nations that have already taken the lead in these areas, we will definitely get there. So, in conclusion, without democracy, we all would believe that development and progress would be impeded. And therefore, there's a need for us all to embrace democracy. And we must also know that even though there's weaknesses of democracy, we would have to develop a stronger approach so that we are able to mitigate these weaknesses of democracy and then see democracy as a possibility for us to stand strong and emerge stronger. And also, I recommended that with regards to my findings in the study, there should actually be some techniques that can facilitate the act of bridging the various leadership traits that are coupled with democracy in the country, so that at least with the issue of bureaucracy, we are able to bridge it to a point that we can do with decision making in a better and a faster pace. Also, I suggested for further studies that with already existing body of literatures that we have, there should be a wider range or a wider generalization of topics where we could broaden the scope of this research. And also for future research, I think the sample size should be increased a bit, and then a lot of institutions allowed to participate so that we actually know the impact of diplomacy and democracy, which can never be done without in political scenes and even in the country sense. Every other country, in a way, experiences diplomacy and democracy. And so we should all embrace it and make it better. And even with the countries that are lagging behind, with my country as a focus as well, we know that we would do better. And with the aids we are getting, we would definitely be independent as we wish to. Thank you. Yes, please.
Just ask the supervisor and
Uh,
the co-supervisor
just a moment.
to comment, and then we leave the floor again to the panel. Please.
Okay, I have two questions, but they are related.
All right.
Can you hear me? Jamina, can you hear me now? No.
Yes,
Okay.
I can.
Okay, thank you. No, I was saying that I have two questions that are somehow related.
Okay.
The first is more theoretical because this is an ambitious thesis, since it puts together two very broad concepts like democracy and diplomacy, or practices, because these are not only concepts, but also democracy is a practice. I mean, while reading your thesis and also during your presentation, I kept asking myself whether this is diplomacy, or you are more interested in foreign policy and influence from the outside. And if it's diplomacy, what kind of diplomacy? Because you mentioned sometimes the influence exerted by others, also through the form of I mean, the public diplomacy. So the discipline that we are studying in this master program. So I would like to ask you to elaborate more on this connection between diplomacy as it is intended, either traditional diplomacy, so the diplomacy conducted by official representatives, or the public diplomacy and cultural diplomacy, so the forms of diplomacy intended for public opinion. So this is one. The second part, the second question, which is related, is on the empirical part of your thesis, because also this part is very, very ambitious. You managed to conduct 16 interviews, if I'm not wrong, with foreign affairs officials and other representatives in your country. So since this part, this chapter is in your thesis, I expected to find more results, more findings about this research, this empirical research that you conducted. So I'd like to elaborate more on the findings, of the main findings from the questionnaire, which is actually a semi-structured questionnaire. No, I mean, you ask some broad questions, and you are presenting some excerpts from the questions you asked. So the first part is more, the first question is more theoretical and is based on the relationship between diplomacy and democracy. And the second one more practical, even though it's related to the first one, because I'd like to know more about the opinions and perspectives of your respondents about this connection. That's it.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the question. So yes, diplomacy obviously has a connection with democracy and also with foreign policy. And here I actually looked at traditional diplomacy as well as public diplomacy. And from the interviews conducted, actually, the respondents also based on the traditional diplomacy fused with public diplomacy, in the sense that traditionally, Ghana's diplomacy was actually not too broadened until we got into the international scene, where we could actually start experiencing the tenets of public diplomacy. And so we were able to actually have negotiations with different nations and also with different countries and some corporations. So with the respondents' views in adoption, especially in that part, the adoption part actually states our negotiations with other countries and our relations with other countries, which actually boosts public diplomacy in the States. And so the respondents actually talked about the fact that foreign policy has influenced Ghana's democracy so much because of public diplomacy, because of our relations with other nations. We actually tend to adopt most of the things from them. And because we are getting the aids from them, once they try to influence our system of governance, we do not have so much control over it. We adopt whatever is given to us because we seek the aids. And so this is how public diplomacy is actually having an impact on Ghana. So yes, with adoption, we are experiencing public diplomacy, irrespective of the fact that we had a form of traditional diplomacy, but now it's becoming more of public. And also, there was a respondent that gave the issue of Abraham Lincoln stating that the democracy, as we all know, is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But then nothing about Ghana's democracy actually emulates this quote, because it has become such that democracy, as we see in the nation, it's actually of the people and by the people, but it is not for the people, because it is mostly infused with whatever influences are coming from foreign policy issues we have with the outside world or with other nations. So yes, Ghana seeks to have a very strong public diplomacy and then democracy as a state. But because of these influences with foreign policies, it's not able to have that strength to be on its own. So everything comes from the public, everything comes from these relations with other states and with other nations as well. Also, there was the mention of in the determinant states, where a respondent actually said that Ghana claims to be independent, but leaves off as begging all the time because we are dependent on other states. And yes, that is so true. And there are so many factors for us where we actually have these migrations, people migrating to other states, to other countries for better living, because Ghana is seen to be underdeveloped or still developing, and we intend to actually adapt or copy from other states. And so foreign policy influences our democratic states in this way. Once we have others emulating from others, then we feel that yes, we are able to align, we are able to relate. So in this way, public diplomacy influences us a lot. And at a point, we even lose the traditional diplomacy that we actually had before. And also, there was also a respondent talking about their love for the Ghanaian system, trying to come back to the traditional states. But it is actually factual that that cannot be fully in place, because in as much as we want to be as independent as we already see ourselves, there are so many ways we would have to depend on others. And even with all other countries, yes, you need to depend on your neighbor to be able to have the strength that you wish for. So even with the most developed countries that we see, there's still public diplomacy influencing them, because foreign policy is infused everywhere. No state is solely independent, even though there's the independence mindset, but every state depends on another state to have its progress. So obviously, foreign policy and public diplomacy is at hand, and it keeps moving irrespective of the states. And this is a major influence in Ghana as well. And with the parts where respondents actually centered on the challenges, it wasn't just mainly on bureaucracy, but also the respondents talked about the fact that um, democracy to the nation has actually influenced insolent behaviors, because in the African continent in general, behaviors are so much of behaviors are given so much of attention that most things are considered vices to society. So the fact that democracy has come to place and then people have the freedom of speech, some of the respondents were of the view that it has created insolent behaviors, because people are able to say whatever they want to leadership and then walk free. In some states, it might not be an issue, but in the African context, it is an issue, because we hold dear respect, and then we actually value certain things that should be seen as the usual, but it is not so. And this is because our traditional diplomacy is still in state. So yes, in as much as we have the influence from public diplomacy, traditional diplomacy, it's also still working, but not fully. And we appreciate the fact that foreign policy has influenced the states, and so it's actually seeing to the progress of our development politically, financially, and democratically. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Maybe.
No, I have no comments.
No other comments?
No.
In that case, if there are no other questions from the jury, I would ask you to yeah. Okay, no, you can stay. We just mute ourselves. So
Okay.
Okay, I assume you can hear me. Good. So in this case, I will read, given that we are all sitting down in this online mood. Well, I have to repronounce your name, so better Jimmy, Miss Jimmy Madana. Given the result of your academic career, this committee has approved your degree examination with a score of 101 out of 110. Therefore, by the powers conferred on us by the rector and in the name of the law, we proclaim you Dottore Magistrale in Public and Cultural Diplomacy in the Classe di Laurea LM81. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, we will take a few hours to record with the typical speed of the University of Siena IT, but don't be panicked. You will have your record soon, your transcript soon.
All right.
Thank you
Okay,
so much.
you very
Bye
much.
bye.
Thank you too. All right.
Bye bye. All right. Bene ragazzi, adesso invece di andare a bere per festeggiare il mio Horizon, devo fare 3 cartelline per la Caroni